there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Saylor-esque talking points.
When Satoshi Nakamoto unveiled Bitcoin amidst the tumultuous financial crisis of 2008, it was a revolutionary concept. It was designed as a decentralized digital currency, a liberating force that would emancipate people from the clutches of governments and central banks. The vision was to create a digital gold underpinned by the world's most powerful computing network, with a fixed 21 million supply cap. This was a game changer, as it was free from the constraints of physical gold, such as its lack of portability, indivisibility, and inflationary nature. However, despite its potential, some, particularly critics, have struggled to accept Bitcoin as a currency. They often question its utility, asking how Bitcoin can be a currency if it cannot be used for everyday transactions like buying a cup of coffee or groceries. To push back against these talking points, some personalities in the Bitcoin space, primarily led by MicroStrategy's Michael Saylor, sought to make Bitcoin's status as a digital property more prominent than its role as a currency. In many of his recent interviews, Saylor has compared owning Bitcoin to owning an expensive piece of art or a block of buildings in Manhattan, emphasizing that no one would expect the owner of either of those things to use a portion of their art of building to buy a cup of coffee or a bag of groceries. In these interviews, Saylor also stressed that touting Bitcoin as a currency that can potentially replace fiat currencies like the dollar will make a lot of powerful people hate Bitcoin. In a recent interview with TFTC, popular investigative journalist Whitney Webb and Mark Goodwin, editor-chief at Bitcoin magazine, discussed the importance of strongly upholding and promoting all of the core fundamentals of Bitcoin and the main purpose for which it was created: to save people from the oppressive traditional banking system. Whitney warns that Bitcoiners are being misled by many, including prominent Bitcoin enthusiasts, into thinking that BlackRock and other Wall Street players are great for this space. We might have been so focused on the numbers game that we failed to protect what matters the most. And Whitney believes there will be dire consequences if we allow this to continue further. As we bring you clips from the interview, please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also lend your voice to the discourse by dropping your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks for watching, and enjoy the video.
I think the cornerstone of the response really does need to be self-reliance, because if you're hoping on people in the private sector solving this problem for you because they don't like ESG, I don't think that's enough at all. And talking about this public-private play, it's important to keep in mind that what happens, I mean, just look at this, the Treasury Secretary office alone. So like in Clinton, it was Robert Rubin, Goldman Sachs. He helps repeal Glass-Steagall. And then when that whole bubble pops in 2008, Goldman Sachs' Henry Paulson is Treasury of the Secretary. Then it's Tim Geithner, who worked under Larry Summers, and Robert Rubin is Treasury Secretary under Obama. And then it's Steve Mnuchin, who was involved in the 2008 financial crisis and whose dad was one of the top guys at Goldman Sachs, and he was also Goldman Sachs. So what they do when they're in power is that they create policies that help benefit them. You know, they came from Goldman Sachs with intentions to implement policies that benefit Goldman Sachs. Right. And so generally what happens is that when the private sector wants something, or they've created a big market for something, they've invested lots of money in creating something like the carbon market, and no one's using the carbon market. They are going to then use the public sector to force people to use the carbon market. And so they're trying to do that through the guise of climate emergency, right? And that's not working. So if that's not working, how will they go about and how will they do it? Like Mark and I have discussed before, they're trying to go about it the private sector route. Oh, okay, you guys aren't interested in programmable, surveillable money if it's emitted by the central bank. So if it's emitted by a private bank, maybe you will. right? But the other side of this is what's happening in places like Argentina right now, where people have lost so much of their purchasing power. So like before Milei came to power, I think the poverty rate was just, I mean, it was insanely high. I think it was something like 60%. And then Milei came into power and devalued the currency by 50%, which led to a massive loss in purchasing power for Argentinians on top of that. Now Argentinians are so desperate and are being told that they're undergoing quote unquote shock therapy designed by a JP Morgan guy. That they're doing WorldCoin. They're scanning their eyes in the Sam Altman orb for shitcoins and a cattle tag, a digital ID. And the idea is to have that be like your access to the internet and using, these tokens and these stable coins, using Tether, using USDC, whatever supported by Mercado Libre's giant entity, Mercado Pago, which is also integrated with Brazil's biggest crypto exchange, Mercado Bitcoin, and then there's Ripio in the mix, which is partnered with all of these guys too. They're going to control all the rails that stuff runs on. And that's where people are running because their money has been so devalued and they have no alternative. And I think that's ultimately the goal, is to get people on programmable, surveillable money by any means necessary. So if you won't do it because you're like, oh yeah, this is a way I'm going to use JP Morgan coin and beat the Fed CBDC. If you're not going to get suckered into that, then, it seems like they'll use destabilization and desperation as a way to get people to onboard into the systems that they're creating. They're not just going to spend billions of dollars creating these systems and have no one use them. They're going to try and use either, desperation created by public sector policies or by private sector policies, and then have, sort of like 2008. Oh, look, the private banks have destroyed the economy. Now we need the public sector to come in and rein them in, even though Obama's cabinet that was supposed to be doing that was literally chosen by Citigroup, right? They're the ones that are going to come in and they're going to rein these in, and these are the policies and changes that need to be made. But actually, it's the bankers that wrote the changes that need to be made.
Whitney and Mark have been working on something they describe as an effort to force Americans to accept stablecoins and digital tokens controlled by commercial banks. In a highly informative joint post shared on Bitcoin Magazine earlier this year, the duo revealed how Fluent Finance, a former partner of Farmington State Bank, a small rural bank that was embroiled in the FTX collapse scandal and has been building CBDC rails for various countries in the Middle East and Africa, is working with certain American banks to introduce a joint US dollar stablecoin. A section of the article reads, "The simulated fear of governments and central banks programming your currency to expire will be conveniently eased by a public rejection of a directly issued CBDC in the US by the Fed. The upholders of the status quo hope that the realities of this false victory and the stablecoin deposit token system to be implemented in lieu of a direct issue digital dollar will go unnoticed by the American public, particularly those segments of the population already wary of CBDCs. Whatever excuse or justification is given to move the US and much of the world into this new financial paradigm, rest assured that the same old bankers and companies, including those who came under scrutiny as part of the FTX scandal, will not only maintain but gain unprecedented control over the financial activity and behavior of every American and whoever else they decide to dollarize." In the TFTF interview, Whitney warns that Bitcoin is the only thing that can protect us from this evil, but that will be impossible if we allow it to be co-opted. Here are more clips from the interview.
We're likely going to get set up for something like that, where they're going to try and make like existing money worthless. And if you want your money to be worth anything and maintain any sort of semblance of purchasing power, you have to use financial products X, Y, and Z. And they're all going to be programmable and surveillable, if not by the private sector, by the public sector. And they're all going to be interoperable. They're going to be all these different wallets and digital ID systems that look like they're different companies, but they're all the same, essentially, in terms that they can export all their data to the same central global database. And, that's essentially the goal here. So how do we fight against that? Don't use the database. Don't use the digital wallet. Don't use the digital ID. Don't interact with the system. And I think also, I think Bitcoin is obviously very key to their plans, but they need Bitcoin to stay, as Larry Fink said, a technology for asset storage. They refuse to have it be a currency. And actually, Jeffrey Epstein gave an interview about Bitcoin that I didn't know about until maybe a couple months ago when we started researching this. Yep. Oh, yes.
No
and
idea.
He says the exact same thing Larry Fink says. It's not a currency. It's, a technology for asset storage. Basically, if Bitcoin is kept in that box that people like Larry Fink and Jeffrey Epstein and people like them, Larry Summers, presumably, who was on the Zappo advisory board, these guys want Bitcoin to be a specific thing because they can use it. And there's people in the space, like this RSK guy, saying Bitcoin needs to lose its revolutionary ethos. It's got to drop that and become a tool for Wall Street. I think it's pretty obvious what needs to be done to scuttle those plans, which would be ensure the opposite. There's a lot of people in the Bitcoin media space that will never talk about this or what you just mentioned. And I think a lot of that is because a lot of money and effort has been put into specifically homogenizing media discourse in the Bitcoin space, because they want Bitcoiners as much as possible to be compliant, while Larry Fink and his ilk do what they want with Bitcoin and make it what they want it to be, so that people are content with number go up and sort of the Saylor-esque talking points that have gotten a lot of, a lot of people have heard those versus what you just mentioned, from example. There needs to be a cultural shift in Bitcoin in the opposite direction of what this Diego guy from Rootstock said, where he's like, we need to drop the whole, stop fiscal irresponsibility of the banks and central banks and, be a challenge and threat to their power. We have to drop that if we want to get rich. I mean, that's the mentality there. And I feel like the Saylor mentality really isn't that different from that. We have to push people in the other direction, because if we go in the direction they're pushing those, people to go in, people that want to drop the ethos or whatever and make Bitcoin just a tool for Wall Street. I mean, no. If we let that happen, very bad things happen. And there has to be a fight. And there's a specific effort that's been launched against people that hold Bitcoin to try and get them to be compliant in that sense. And that's through, controlling the discourse in the media space. There needs to be a desire among Bitcoiners to return to the original ethos, not the opposite. There needs to be a fight for that. People need to care about that again.
Whitney has raised lots of important questions and observations. Are we losing sight of why Bitcoin was created? Or are forces like BlackRock necessary evils we must contend with for Bitcoin to go mainstream? Please share your thoughts, opinions, and observations in the comments section below. Also, ensure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos. Thanks for watching.